In March 2020, the Chinese embassy in Germany received a help call from Heidelberg from a doctor named Thomas Rabe. In the phone call, the doctor said that he and his family were infected with the COVID-19 and hoped to get some medicine produced in China. In addition to saving himself and his family, he also wanted to save his patients. After hearing about the situation, the staff of the China embassy agreed to his request without hesitation. When this news spread to China, it caused a very big sensation in Nanjing city. The medicines needed by the German were also in short supply in China at that time, but the people of Nanjing did their best to overcome all difficulties, and finally raised more than 600 bottles of urgently needed medicines, 200 sets of protective clothing, and more than 30,000 masks. On April 21, after receiving the medicines, the staff of the Chinese embassy in Germany drove more than 700 kilometers to hand over the supplies to the Thomas Rabe. Who is this German? Why did he ask China for help? Why did the people of Nanjing attach so much importance to this German? In fact, it all because of Thomas Rabe's grandfather, John Rabe. In today's video, let's talk about the story of John Rabe. Let's get started. In 1947, a poor family of 9 people lived in a very struggling life in Berlin, the capital of Germany. In the eyes of people who don't know the inside story, this is just the treatment that an accomplice serving fascism should have. However, a few years ago, he saved about 250,000 Chinese civilians during the Nanjing massacre. He is the German John Rabe, known as the Schindler of China. For decades, because of Rabe's status as a member of the Nazi Party, his deeds have been kept low-key in his hometown. So, Schindler, who protected the Jews, is almost a household name among Westerners, but little is known about John Rabe. Johann Rabe was born in Hamburg in 1882. At the age of 26, in 1908, sent by Siemens, Rabe came to China for the first time to open up business. With his outstanding personal work ability, he was promoted to the general representative in China. In August 1937, Japanese aircraft began to launch rounds of bloodthirsty air raids on Nanjing city. As an ally of the Japanese, the German embassy in China learned of the deployment of the Japanese airstrikes early on and immediately advised all German citizens in China to evacuate Nanjing as soon as possible. Siemens also agreed that all employees should leave Nanjing. As a German, Rabe could have left Nanjing to return his homeland. However, perhaps out of love for this land where he has lived for more than 30 years, or a sense of justice in his heart, Rabe resolutely chose to stay. If I leave, what should these poor people do? The Chinese who have been kind to me for 30 years are about to suffer, the rich run away, but the poor have nowhere to hide. I can't survive alone. It was with this belief that Rabe and other foreigners who stayed in Nanjing saved 250,000 Chinese lives in a tragic massacre. In order to protect people in Nanjing, Rabe and dozens of other foreigners who stayed behind set up an international zone on November 19, preparing to house homeless people. At that time, Germany had the best relationship with Japan, and Rabe was a member of the National Socialist Party. Rabe therefore assumed the chairmanship of the international district. So within a narrow 3.88 square kilometers, dozens of refugee shelters were established. More than 20 days later, the city of Nanjing was destroyed, and the beast-like Japanese army abandoned all humanity, creating a human tragedy here with their own hands. The Japanese army is made up of released prisoners. While recording the atrocities he witnessed by the Japanese army in his diary, Rabe used his special status to do his best to protect the safety of the Chinese people in the safe zone. In reality, however, the safe zone is not safe. On many occasions, the Japanese army forcibly entered the safe zone under the pretext of hunting down Chinese soldiers and persecute civilians. But generally speaking, the refugee shelters under the jurisdiction of the International District, which Rabe is in charge of, saved at least 250,000 refugees in the city, greatly increasing the chances of survival of the people in the massacre. It is worth mentioning that the shelter transformed from Rabe's house is the only place in Nanjing that has no refugee casualties. This refugee shelter accommodated a total of 602 Chinese people, including 126 children, and they were provided with 3 bags of rice every day. It lasted until June of the following year. After confirming their safety, these hundreds of refugees finally left his house. On the New Year's Day in 1938, out of sincere gratitude, hundreds of refugees jointly gave Rabe a piece of silk cloth to Rabe. On this cloth was written a sentence that moved us so much: "You are the savior of us." In February 1938, Rabe set off to return to China. The sense of justice in his heart made him feel that it was necessary to publish the horror records he saw in Nanjing. At that time, Germany was under Hitler's high-handed rule. So he wrote a very humble letter to Hitler, revealing to him in detail the various crimes committed by the Japanese in China in the past few months, thinking that Germany would put pressure on Japan to correct their behaviors. However, Rabe, who had stayed in China for many years and did not understand the Nazis, did not know how Germany could risk offending its allies and allow news of the Nanjing massacre to spread throughout the West. Just a few days later, several policemen rushed to the door and took Rabe away and put him in prison, confiscating his precious evidence materials filmed in Nanjing. Although Siemens later rescued him from prison, Rabe also fell from his original high-level position to a low-level ordinary staff member. The ensuing war put the originally well-off family into trouble. In the air raid, his house was bombed, and Rabe could only live in the home of his sick son-in-law. After the war, the devastated Germany did not quickly come out of the shadows. People lived in the famine. In August 1945 alone, half of the babies in Berlin died of starvation. In the case of insufficient food supply, Rabe's family can only survive on unpalatable black noodle porridge and wild vegetable soup every day. Later, because of the policy of liquidating the Nazis after the war, Rabe's membership of the National Socialist Party caused him to be imprisoned again. Siemens lost his job and his family's important source of income was cut off. While Rabe was worried about his family's livelihood, food parcels filled with sausages, butter, and coffee had departed from Switzerland for Berlin. After learning the difficult situation of the Rabe family, the Nanjing government immediately organized citizens to conduct fundraising activities. Since March 1947, Rabe's family has regularly received food such as sausages, milk powder, butter, rose sugar, and coffee. The Rabe family was finally freed from the shackles of post-war hunger. He was so moved that he wrote in his diary, "I will never be disappointed again by what I have done in the past and the sympathy I have received today." According to calculations, the scale of donations including food is about 100 million French currency, which is almost $2,000 in conversion. This was already a huge sum of money in 1947. John Rabe died of a stroke at home in 1950. Due to John Rabe's sensitive status as a member of the National Socialist Party, the hero's deeds have been kept in a low-key state for a long time in his homeland. Rabe's diary, which records the evidence of the Japanese massacre, was not known to the world until the 1990s. Have you heard of John Rabe's story before? What do you say about him? Well, thanks for listening. See you next time.